Say you wanted to build the cheapest gaming PC that you could. You'd go for second-hand components. But say it had to be new, you'd probably choose the 2200G, which is exactly what I chose for a PC that I was building for a friend. I then realised that it would make for an interesting video, which is what you're seeing now. The 2200G, in my mind, is a bit of a miracle product. For £90 you get a processor worth about £90, but you also get a graphics card thrown in that's also worth about £90. Now neither of these are insanely fast, but they're still powerful enough to run almost any game out there, and that's the most important thing, isn't it? So if you're a student or just incredibly poor, then this could be your way of getting into PC gaming. Sadly I can't show you it because it's hidden underneath this fan, which you also get for free. But under there, somewhere, is the 2200G. It's smaller than the wrapper for a small-sized condom. It only consumes up to 65 watts of power, and it remained so cool that, after benchmarking, I jammed my finger through the fan blades and the heatsink beneath wasn't even warm. The fan hurts though, so be sure to turn off the PC before doing something like this. And although it's only £90, you also need to buy the rest of the PC. I was lucky enough to have an old PC already, which cut the cost of this project down to £200. But if you've currently got nothing, then you can build this entire thing for £300. And like I said, it will run almost any game out there. It will run newer games at lower settings and older games at higher. The rest of this video will show examples of it running games at what I consider to be the best playable settings and what the experience was like. Because benchmarks and 60fps targets can only tell you so much. Also, this footage was recorded using Relive, AMD's screen capture tool. It isn't officially supported on the APUs, but a quick download later I got it working. This is great news, since it means you can use this setup to stream with, or to record YouTube videos with, or whatever. But there's just one big downside. Frame rates are lower with it enabled. On a powerful graphics card this isn't noticeable at all, but on the 2200G by disabling Relive, I got almost exactly 20% more performance out of every game I tested. This is great news. It means that, whatever the frame rate shown in this video, expect 20% more if you're simply playing it. Unless I state otherwise. I understand this confuses the video a bit, since the footage shown on screen is a lie. But it's a consistent lie. And since this video is about the playability of the games, I do mention where disabling capture would make a difference, like where otherwise you can't get enough FPS. But for the most part I still managed smooth performance with the capture enabled, and the gameplay clips you'll be seeing here are testament to that. It does mean that you'll likely be able to play these games beyond the resolution and quality settings shown though, so treat this video as a worst case scenario for the games in question. We'll start with CSGO. Running at 720p with all settings on low, it ran at about 140 FPS. And against bots, who are known for sucking CPU performance, this went down to about 120. Counter-Strike at these frame rates felt very fluid. But is this enough? Some people will swear that you need 200 or 300 FPS to play this game well. I can't speak for them, but I would personally feel comfortable playing competitively on this system, and I'm pretty good. And I don't want it to detract from the 2200G, but let's be honest here, it's a big step up from the laptops, 2006 Dells and consoles that the sort of person getting this system will be coming from. I'm going to say that, with hundreds of FPS, CSGO's performance is a big win for this system. In fact, I reckon you could push it further. At 1080p, medium settings, FXAA and with bots, it was still comfortably over 100 FPS a lot of the time, but I think even this will be high enough for a lot of people. And out of curiosity, very high at 1080p with 2x anti-aliasing averaged around 60 FPS. This still felt smooth, but I would not use this competitively. I didn't take the time to identify which graphics options slowed it down the most, but the 2200G has comfortable headroom for you to turn up the graphics options that you care most about. I would have done CSGO in more depth, but my brother wanted to save this for his channel. Next is another competitive game, Rainbow Six Siege. At 1080p lowest settings, it was very much on the line between playable and unplayable. The benchmark results look like this, so about 50 FPS. I suspect if you're good at this game, which I'm not, you'll have to lower the resolution somewhat to be happy with the frame rate you'll get. Disabling screen capture boosted frame rates by 10% at 720p and by 18% at 1080p. What this means is that if you're wanting the best frame rates, stick to the low resolution, but you might still be able to up the graphics options a bit before the frame rate begins to drop. At 720p it felt nice, averaging comfortably above 60 FPS, even with high settings. Don't blame the system, blame my skill at this game for this terrible gameplay performance. I'm confident that if you're willing to take the time to dabble, you'll be able to find a very reasonable balance between resolution and graphics options that runs well in this game. It's just somewhere below 1080p, that's all. PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds is the most demanding competitive game that I tested. Because of that, I lowered all of the settings to prioritise getting a high frame rate. I started at 1080p, but with 70% resolution scaling, which makes it roughly 1344 by 756, and it was really nice and responsive in the starting area. Look, I even made a friend. This stellar performance continued to the plain bit. In fact, I was even reaching 70 and even 80 FPS at points. So I ramped it up to full 100% scaling again, returning it to 1080p. But things took a turn for the worst as I was plummeting towards the ground and it dropped to the 20s. I hastily turned it back down to 70% scaling, but to my horror, the low FPS remained. About 20 FPS in the air, and 30 once I reached the ground of the jungle map. Reflex took over and I found a rock to hide behind as I dropped the resolution further. 720p ran at a responsive 40 FPS. You can see from these clips how much control I had when aiming. It honestly felt smoother than you might imagine 40 FPS to. But you being pro competitive players, you'll want more still. So I dropped the scaling down to 70%, to a pathetic 900 by 500, roughly. But boy, was it smooth. I couldn't see much, but it ran like a dream. In fact, individual pixels had reached such a large size that they were beginning to anti-alias themselves. It was weird, but can you play like this? I managed a kill. A single kill, making this one of my best games ever. With a 2200G, I was on a roll. I was undefeated, so I did the one thing that would keep it that way. I did revisit this game to test without screen capture, and it made anywhere between a 0 and 22% difference, depending on the direction I was looking, indicating that the CPU could be the bottleneck at points, but only when the frame rate was already in excess of 60 FPS, and nothing could stop it from slowing down as I was parachuting towards the ground. But actual gameplay situations were unhindered. When asked about AMD, popular streamer and pro gamer Shroud said that you shouldn't buy them because...
Just remember that. It's not because like they're, you know, fucking... I don't know. I don't know.
Where the fuck I am.
I don't know. You know? I just don't know.
So I guess he doesn't know. Next up, Skyrim. I started off testing at 1080p on high and with FXAA, but this is one game where I overestimated what it was capable of. Holy shit! That was disgusting. How horrible. I wasn't even averaging 30 FPS. It appears that Skyrim Special Edition is quite a bit more demanding than Skyrim used to be, back in the day. Not wanting to sacrifice resolution, I tried to make it similar to what I felt high settings on vanilla Skyrim would have been like, by unticking all of the new features. But it still didn't feel completely smooth. Good enough for the types of people who play this game, maybe, but I felt I had to go lower still. I set everything down to medium, keeping it at 1080p, but without anti-aliasing. Even with these compromises, I still felt it looked better than vanilla Skyrim on highest did, whilst running at about the same performance as my Radeon 4850 did back in the day. If that's anything to go by, it's the shadow setting that has the largest impact on performance. I didn't take the time to test it, but I swear the shadows set to medium in this special edition still look better than very high from the original game. I'm absolutely sure you could hit 60 FPS if you lowered the resolution, but I'd rather have 1080p and play like this. It was smooth enough for me for this kind of game, especially without the 20% relive tax. With GTA 5, I had no doubt that the game would run okay, and sure enough it did. It hovered between 40 and 50 FPS throughout the benchmark on normal settings at 1080p, and disabling relive brought it comfortably up into the 50s. This game looks good even on the lowest, normal settings, but I also upped the graphics to high, enabled ambient occlusion and upped the distance scaling a bit as well, just to see what would happen. The results dropped down to the mid-30s. The 2200G definitely has some headroom to play about with in GTA 5, but I think high everything is pushing it a bit. If you really want higher settings in this game, then you'll have to lower the resolution to below 1080p. It's a viable alternative. Now the ultimate question. Can it run Crysis? No it can't. It refused to load to the menu, immediately booting me out and back onto the desktop. The problem wasn't with the 2200G, but rather that this game's too old. But using a 64-bit executable, I was able to load it up. And in-game, it was a choice between medium settings at a smooth feeling 50 or so FPS, and high settings at a slightly laggy feeling 30 or so. Frame times felt very consistent though. so it felt better than the frame rates may have suggested, though explosions in battles still made it stutter. Crysis is still a challenge for a system like this. It performs roughly the same as a high-end graphics card from 2008 would have done, so a bit like with Skyrim. Expect the sort of performance you get from a GeForce 8800 or Radeon 4850. I'm not sure if I'm impressed or disappointed with this, to be honest, but the game's known for being unoptimized. So next I tried Crysis 3. Unlike the first game, this one looks good even on low settings, so much so that I was happy to stick to that. Really, look up comparison videos if you want to see for yourself. I started at full 1080p. It ran at about 30 FPS, a little too slow for my liking, but it did at least remain rather constant at that level, with no stutters or freezes. With budget hardware, anti-aliasing can be your worst enemy, but in this game it was my best friend. Dropping to 1600x900 but turning on medium amounts of SMAA really smoothed the image out. I preferred the result to 1080p without anti-aliasing, and the frame rate rose to a much more playable 40 FPS. And I mean it. If you're used to modern reviews and benchmarks, you see 60 FPS as being the standard to aim for, but with the 2200G it's rather the upper limit of what you should expect in modern games. That doesn't make the games unplayable, or even laggy. It just means you appreciate steady frame times so much more, and the huge role they play in determining how playable a game feels at 50, 40, or even just 30 FPS. So although I say it's playable at 900p, I also dropped it down to 720p to try and hit 60 FPS. It was only just shy, but felt very smooth and very responsive. But this low resolution did look excessively blurry. Disabling screen capture was the golden ticket, and that 20% of extra performance opened up a lot of exciting opportunities, of which admittedly I didn't spend much time experimenting with. Even with Relive still on, I found performance acceptable at 1366x768. And although this is just a small increase over 720p, it reduced the jaggies, particularly on the foliage. This was a very satisfying compromise, and is probably what I'd want to play this game at, using the 2200G. Up next is Arma 3, which is more of a challenge for your CPU than it is for your GPU, but it ran fine on the 2200G, apart from the occasional freeze when it was loading a new line of dialogue for some reason. At 1080p, but with very low settings, it looked absolute ass. Don't play like this. I know that gameplay is all that matters, but even I have my limits. I ramped the settings up to mid to high levels at 1080p. It looked a lot better, and aside from one or two audio stutters, which seem inevitable whichever setting you choose, it remained playable. Being the kind of game it is, 30 to 40 FPS felt fine, and there are more than enough graphics options to scale back should you really want more. Rome 2 is another game that runs buttery smooth at lowest setting, so at least you know that you can play it. But would you want to? It honestly looks worse than Rome 1, and plays worse as well. Running on lowest is unnecessary since it can also handle medium and with power to spare. At these settings it looks absolutely fine, and is ultimately what I recommend running at, in part because it refused to run the benchmark at the high preset. Doesn't matter if you have unlimited RAM or not, it refused to work for me. I found this game's benchmark results only improved by 15% from disabling Relive, so there could be an element of CPU limitness going on from this game, which wouldn't surprise me. I'd have investigated this game's quirks further if I had the time, but this isn't even my PC. My friend is going to be suspicious enough when they see all these icons on the desktop of their new system. Tomb Raider 2013. This seems an odd choice since I have the 2016 Rise of the Tomb Raider as well, and I benchmark that next, but I thought it would be fun to compare the two. At normal settings at 1080p, it runs smoothly despite being just 40 FPS. You could turn stuff down further to get more, but I didn't think it was necessary. Instead, I ramped it up to high, and although it only dropped a bit down to 35, it was enough to make my aim feel a bit off. Normal settings should be used to play this game. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Rise of the Tomb Raider, on the other hand, is a lot more demanding, but it's also prettier, so we can lower stuff further with it still looking okay. But in all seriousness, this is the game I think performed the worst out of all the ones that I tested. I never enjoyed the combat in this game. For me it was more about the exploration and adventure, and now I have another reason to hate it. It means that you have to have playable frame rates. If there weren't enemies, I'd be a lot happier to stick to 30 FPS and to enjoy the beauty of this game at higher resolutions and settings. But in this game, your aim seems tied to your frame rate in a weird way that I'm not used to. Like if there's a dip while you're turning the camera, it affects how quickly the camera turns, and if this happens at an inconvenient moment, it can send Lara plummeting off a cliff. Disable Relive! You might be screaming at me right now, but it didn't help. Yes, I got an extra 20% performance, but I don't think it's the frame rate that was the problem in the first place. This seems to be a CPU limited game. At points, all 4 cores would max out at 100% and stick there for a few seconds, and my aim would suffer during this period. Overclocking the 2200G might help, but really I think you'll need more threads to make Rise of the Tomb Raider playable. But say you've got the 2200G and want to play this game. If it's going to struggle on lowest, then you might as well up the graphics settings. However, I didn't get far before the graphics began to bottleneck performance either. This is just a very demanding game. Doom! This was one I really wanted to test, being so well optimised and for supporting Vulkan and whatever. Despite that, 1080p at medium settings resulted in an unplayable, but consistent, 25 FPS. I lowered the resolution scaling to 75% and it ran decently. But Doom isn't a game that you want running pretty decently. High frame rates are essential, and I went out of my way to hit 60 FPS. Lowest settings at the lowest resolution scaling achieved this, making it totally smooth and a joy to play. It might not be crisp and clear, but unlike Rise of the Tomb Raider, you can play this game with the gameplay unhindered by the frame rate, provided you're willing to lower the settings enough. Just out of curiosity, I kept the resolution at 720p, but upped the quality to high, and although I was still getting over 40 FPS, the input lag was off-putting, and I ended up having this embarrassingly difficult battle with the easiest enemy in the game. Even with Relive disabled, I'd still stick to the lowest settings. This really is a twitch shooter, and the extra 20% performance is best used as a buffer to protect against any nasty, unwanted, demonic stutters lurking around the next corner. Maybe you're disappointed with the results so far. Perhaps you were expecting 60 FPS at 1080p in all games, provided you lowered the quality settings enough. Time for a bit of good news. I thought Dirt Rally would run at low settings at 1080p, but I underestimated what the 2200G could manage with this game. It ran so well that I bumped it up to medium settings, and it looked great while still running at a smooth average of 60 FPS. This makes it one of the more modern games that can be run decently and with plenty of power to spare, which is surprising since my GeForce 1080 setup struggles with this game at higher settings, though that is at 4K resolution. I saw Mirror's Edge on my Origin account and thought, yeah, that's a pretty game. Remember, this is the original one, not the recent game. Unfortunately, the video clips I captured looked more like 30 FPS, but in reality it's a lot closer to 60. I tried to fix this by turning Relive off and on again, but it didn't seem to work, so you'll just have to go off the frame rate shown in the top left of the screen. Or from this, where I fell back to the 2008 style way of capturing video game footage. I started with this game on higher settings plus anti-aliasing, but I didn't feel it comfortably managed 60. So I lowered the settings a bit and it still didn't quite reach it. So I was like, screw it, and decided that higher settings were good enough. The game runs above 50 FPS most of the time, but there's some kind of built-in frame rate limiter that prevents it from ever going above 62 FPS for some reason. Even with VSync disabled. I tried turning that on and off again and everything. I know that this is an older game, so being able to run it smoothly isn't a big achievement, but if you're just getting your first gaming rig, don't dismiss the possibility of playing some of the older classics like this one. If you think about it, the 2200G can handle the vast majority of games nicely. It's just a handful of the most recent that require compromises, and I think you'd be missing out if you got a 2200G and then only played those. Don't rule out the older classics, and the enjoyment that can be had from them. And lastly, The Witcher 3. This proved to be more demanding than I had expected. You have to game at 720p and at low settings for a smooth experience. This is a game where I tested frame rate lock-in. The idea is that by locking it to 30 FPS, it will make it feel smoother than if it's wildly fluctuating from between like 30 and 50 for example. And it felt okay in this game. You'll have to be the one to decide if it's good enough for you, but it is an option that you have with this game. With it, low settings felt responsive, medium was acceptable apart from freezes between areas, and high settings looked nice but the frame rate was simply too low for me. You could probably get away with low settings at 30 FPS at a higher resolution as well, but I didn't try it. This game is playable, but requires sacrifices. I got about 5 more frames a second by disabling screen capture. It made medium feel a bit more fluid, but high was still out of the question. So, conclusion time. I feel that you can split the 2200G's performance up into 3 categories: old games, new games, and competitive games. Its strongest performance was in competitive games. These are generally designed to be scalable and to work well with a wide range of hardware, and the 2200G typically has the horsepower required to score smooth frame rates with extra power to spare, should you care strongly enough about particular graphics settings. Old games, as you'd expect, perform reasonably well. If it's over 5 years old, then smooth performance at 1080p is generally attainable, but you may still have to drop a few graphics options to reach it. I was a little surprised, and disappointed at times when it performed similarly to a high-end graphics card from a decade ago. I was really hoping that we'd have left that era of performance behind, once and for all. But then, you do have to remember that this is a £90 all-in-one device that consumes a tiny fraction of the power that the cards back then would have. Plus, built-in screen capture. Even with the 17% performance impact, it's better than any option that you had back then. And although the whole screen capture thing has been confusing, it does at least show that you can record and stream on the Ryzen 2200G, should you not mind the performance tax. And lastly are new games. The 2200G struggles at times, but with the exception of Tomb Raider, are all perfectly smooth and responsive, provided you're willing to lower the quality and resolution to minimal levels at times. The important thing is, you can still play them, and at 50 or even 60 FPS, which puts it far ahead of many console games. It's also worth mentioning that since the Ryzen 2200G is an APU, this means the bit of it that's a graphics card actually steals it from your PC's main RAM supply. In normal systems, quantity of RAM matters more than quality, but here, both matter. Here are results from the benchmark in CSGO. You need 2 sticks of fast RAM if you want to get the best gaming performance. For a budget PC build, I recommend 2 lots of 4GB of the highest speed that you can justify, though sadly I had to use 2 sticks of 8GB in this video, since that's all I had spare. You can get RAM that's faster than 2933MHz. The sticks I was using can actually go up to 3200, but this PC refused to load with anything higher. Also, being an APU, you'll need to use an HDMI cable to link it to your monitor, because the only other option is VGA. And that is no. Before testing it for myself, I had seen the benchmarks. I knew roughly what to expect, but nothing compares to actually testing it and seeing it in game for yourself. I have my own personal thresholds for smoothness and what I consider to be acceptable. Yours may vary, but for the most part I have been impressed with what the Ryzen 2200G is capable of. If you're scoffing at how much faster your PC is right now, chances are the 2200G was never going to interest you. But if you're a student or a really poor person who thinks a gaming PC is out of your price range, then this kind of system could be what you want. If you currently only own a console or a slow laptop or PC limping along on Vista, this will be a huge step up that will open up many exciting gaming opportunities for you. The other option if you're looking to game on a budget is to risk it with second-hand stuff. The plus side is that it's possible to get something even faster for the same price, although obviously it will be nowhere near as cool or power efficient. Find an older i5 and Radeon 7870, save some money with the cheaper DDR3 as well, and you'll be onto a winner. But there's one last trick the 2200G has up its sleeve. It's all upgradable. You can replace the CPU with anything up to a high-end 8-core Ryzen 2700X, and wait till next year and you'll even be able to use the next-gen 3000 series. And, perhaps of even more interest to you in the near future, you can slot a dedicated graphics card into the system whenever you like. For about £50 you should be able to find a decent older graphics card that should let you play most modern games reasonably well at 1080p. But really, there's no limit to the power of the card you can get, provided your power supply and wallet can handle it. You could even slot a GeForce 280 Ti in there. This PC will now be passed on to a friend who I'm sure won't be thrashing it quite as much as I have in these past 24 hours since building it. If you want to know more, check out Budget Builds Official, who's an absolute master at picking up old and used bargains for budget rigs. And here's my video from earlier in this year where I first raved about how great the 2200G was. And although I've only talked about that one, did you know that it's got a bigger brother?